pay private sector investors, and then we will reward tropical forest countries for their conservation. We are, are thinking about $4 per hectare of tropical forest standing, and that the TFCs, as we call them, will use their own their own monitoring systems. We will establish a guideline, a standard that they should follow, and they will provide us information within year and 2 years, so we can monitor and gauge if they're actually conserving for tropical forests. There will be eligibility criteria such as decreasing deforestation levels, the commitment to address 20% for IPLCs, monitoring systems that follow the standards we are proceeding. Transparency is key to this endeavor, so we can show to our investors what's been doing and it's taken seriously. But the most important thing here is that we are aiming to give tropical forest countries a long-term sustainable flow of payments. It's not a project-based solution such as JEF, such as the Climate Fund. It will be directed to the national treasury. I was hearing the minister of Belize here, and he was describing a problem the country faced with a hurricane and then wildfires. How could the tropical forest countries combat these issues without a flow of funding constant to pay for firefighters or number of mechanisms to tackle climate change and its consequences? So this is why the TFFF is designed to be a complement to this whole structure we have, such as RED+, and we will tackle the whole different challenges we have here. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. It sounds like a fascinating initiative. You mentioned that it's a regional undertaking, so it's not just Brazil, but reaching out to 10 other countries. So I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about some of the lessons learned, because we know regional initiatives are tough. But we also know that you want to go far, you go alone, but if you want to go quickly, you go alone. If you want to go far, you have companions. Don't judge me, it's something along those lines. It's an African proverb that I absolutely love. So you are going far, clearly, and you have partners in your journey. A little bit about those lessons that you've had so far, forging that partnership.
Yes, thank you. As we know, Brazil has the Amazon Fund, which is a great form of finance to finance projects in the Amazon. But we know that this isn't enough, and we need to act collectively in order to have the scale large enough to tackle the whole issue. And in this context, we are designing the TFFF alongside, not within, the UNFCCC, the CDB, or the UNCCD. So we would not only count on traditional donors such as the UK, Germany, Norway, which are traditional donors to tropical forest initiatives, but we can also count with developing countries and developing economies which have the strength to finance this initiative as well, such as China, EAU, which are closely working closely with us. And they offer us some different perspectives from the investor side and we as countries, as tropical forest countries, we come up with some ideas that we have already tested in our territory. And Colombia, for instance, has the Mesa de Concertación with the IPLCs, which is the most advanced form to deal with these local communities and indigenous peoples. So we are working together with task forces, different task forces in the eligibility criteria, in the finance modeling and governance as well. So to create something that might be robust enough and provide this sustainable flow of capital for tropical forest countries.
Thank you so much, Diogo. Now, shifting gears a little bit, bringing in the experience of James Cooper, obviously representing private sector. So how can carbon and biodiversity markets be integrated to unlock greater financial flows for nature positive outcomes? That's $1 million questions, and James, if you want to take that.
It is the $1 million question, more like billions, right? And it's not easy, and I think we have to be open and understanding of that fact, because there is an existing ecosystem around carbon markets that has attracted quite a large scale of capital historically, and that has moved up and down as interest in carbon markets and demand has waxed and waned. But ultimately, to not use that ecosystem would be silly. That doesn't mean that biodiversity, finance biodiversity markets, the different financial instruments that should be used have to use carbon markets. What's interesting is when we think of how we do things in a blended manner, right? The really interesting example at the moment is TFFF. And the reason for that is because that, the way we tend to think of it is like this long-term endowment for nature in tropical forest countries, providing that sustainable long-term money. But it can complement, and seeing that as in some ways the biodiversity angle, and then it can complement the existing makeup of REDD Plus that is operating across Brazil and other tropical forest nations. So you can think there, or from our perspective, of we provide capital and finance to governments in particular state-level governments in Brazil, so Tocantins, Piauí, and we are also working with the government of Misiones in Argentina, where we provide them with the upfront financing to establish jurisdictional REDD programs operating, at a landscape level. The reason we do that is because it starts to move it away from some of the historical criticism of REDD. It also makes use of the government's ability to direct capital efficiently and safely using safeguard information systems, benefit sharing mechanisms with IPLCs. So there's a blended element there that you can overlap the two. The other angle is, well, can you take a carbon market or a carbon credit and see it as I mentioned this yesterday, but a currency that maybe you don't worry about the carbon, but what you're most interested in is a metric associated with it that is related to biodiversity. The interesting example there is, take Guyana. Guyana is currently selling the highest priced REDD credits or avoided deforestation credits globally. As Kevin said yesterday, I think the last sale of that was $22.25 into a compliance market, into airlines who have to buy those credits under rules from the International Civil Aviation Organization. Those credits are issued under the ART tree standard, architecture for REDD Plus transactions. Those, the ART Secretariat has published for consultation some a method to try and capture the beyond carbon benefits of those credits. And working with Guyana, we're exploring how we can create the verification of those outcomes to overlay over those credits. If we then look to a buyer of carbon credits or a buyer of biodiversity credits, we can ask that question, which is the outcome you're most interested in? But to have that single currency and utilize that joint architecture, I think it's efficient, both for capital, but also for trying to future-proof where we go. Because if we start to disaggregate them, I think we end up on a road to nowhere.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you so much, James. And now specifically on Mercury and e-institution, why are you guys in this space? Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What's driving you, and why do you think this is an important business to invest in?
Sylvania, who I'm representing, is a nature-based investment vehicle seeded with capital from Mercuria, which is a global commodity company. The management, the ownership of Mercuria believe in two key things. One, that this is the right thing to do, and two, that this can be something that can create financial return. As Sanjan mentioned yesterday, there is a bet that can be made that biodiversity in the future is more than biodiversity today. And so we believe in that. The question is, how do you actually allocate capital in a way that create that financial return? Today, carbon markets, and Mercuria, Sylvania has been active in carbon markets for a long time. Those can create that return and have created that return. We firmly believe that biodiversity is going to travel along the same path. So we're in it for two reasons: because it's the right thing to do, and because financially it can create returns. Now, you have to question what those returns are. They're not outsized, right? And the reason they can't be outsized is because it has to be fair, because where that value accrues from is ultimately a global commons. It's ultimately the rights and the ownership of our PLCs. And everyone has to be cognizant of that. This isn't something where hedge funds are going to make ridiculously outsized returns. If that's what they're thinking, they shouldn't be in it. It's about making fair returns that are risk adjusted.
I like that it's because it's the right thing to do and it promises great financial returns. Maybe not great, but good financial, solid financial returns. How about that?
I'd like to be able to say they're more solid from being able to look forward, but it's a bet that our company historically that has bet on a lot of products. It's one that we want to make.
Yeah. No, thanks for playing in the space. Now, moving to a very important also player in the Caribbean, and that's CBF, the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. We have Karen McDonald-Gale with us. So, Karen, please tell us, what are some of the most effective financing instruments CBF has deployed here in the region?
Thank you. And first, thank you to the government and of Ghana, and particularly the indigenous peoples whose land we are on. So thank you very much for hosting us. There's a very complex structure on the screen, but I think the first thing I want to note in terms of the title of our panel was scaling. So the size of Antigua, which is one of the small island developing states we work with, is 281 square kilometers in land. And as we've been starting to say, it is, and we all are boss, so big ocean states, but very small land states. So in relation to some of the discussions today, I mean, Sylvania is going to have a hard time for 281 square kilometers, and even less of which is tropical forests. So that's a reality. But when the Antiguan racer disappears, it is still a disappearance across the globe. So that's the context that we have to work in the Caribbean countries, the Caribbean islands that I work with. And I would say that the CBF itself is designed as a conservation trust fund. You've heard that term mentioned many times today. It is the idea of how we make this long term, how we create those financing mechanisms, not mechanism by mechanism, but grouping those mechanisms in a way that makes sense for the range of possibilities, some of which we've heard today. And so the CBF is designed with an endowment fund. We also host, as you see, 2 other types of sinking funds, and we are working on creating other possibilities of finance mechanisms so that there is a range of options available as opposed to this single structure for a number of reasons. One, because in the countries we are working with, there is the need for these hubs to be created. So what we've done with the endowment fund that we have from the government of Germany, TNC, and the World Bank is to create the regional platform, but also national level conservation trust funds. And the idea of those national conservation trust funds is in each of their countries, they establish themselves, receiving regular funding from the CBF, but then building on that to create the opportunities for financial possibilities. So to recognize in the room, the Protected Areas Trust of Ghana is the Ghana-based trust fund. And then we have, if you can read the countries, the list of countries that we are working with across the Caribbean, with the concept and the idea that there must be some order to what we're doing. I think the other aspect of it is it has to be Caribbean focused, and it has to be Caribbean voices. So it's very important to us that the Caribbean leaders, that the countries, the national level conservation trust funds have Caribbean leaders telling us what's happening in their countries as opposed to any other possibility. When they receive the funding, they let us know what is best for the work to be done on the ground. It is a non-government entity, but it doesn't mean there is no government. And it's very important that we work with the governments in the countries to design what makes sense for work on the ground, but that we're flexible enough to do the work in a fashion that makes sense. And so that's the idea and the concept of the CBF, and we expect to continue to grow working with a range of finance mechanisms that we're designing, particularly in the near future. We are hoping to design, under our Blue Economy program, the idea of a blue credit or debit card that will give returns on a more regular, perpetual basis for the countries. You heard Belize mention. I was very pleased to have the minister mentioning the value of conservation trust funds, that exit fees are a very common source of perpetual funding for conservation trust funds in the region. And of course, there are a number of us who have gone through debt swap processes.
Thank you so much, Karen. I have to say I was very privileged of visiting the Great Bird Island and holding the Antiguan racer. It was a very special experience. And thanks for reminding us also that the solutions need to be fit for purpose. We do need to talk about localized solutions and what's needed in particular country reality versus big ambitious goals. We do need both, right? So building on what you were talking about, Karen, with CBF, so how do you ensure that the funding reaches the local communities and supports the long-term conservation goals?
Right, so the main way of doing that is those national conservation trust funds and other partners in each of the countries. So through the endowment fund, we work through the national conservation trust funds, but through the other 2 sinking funds, we do have partners on the ground and make sure that they receive enough funding for the monitoring and evaluation of the work that they're doing on the ground and to be able to achieve the results they're doing. CBF itself is also totally virtual, so my staff is across the entire Caribbean. The concept, again, being that we have to be in the space with the players that are doing the work on the ground. So the idea is really that we are coordinating, facilitating, making sure that the questions are asked, but the answers have to come from those on the ground in the countries.
Thank you, and thanks for mentioning those national conservation funds. I was with the one of St. Lucia last week, in fact, and they're doing fantastic work on another racer, but now it's St. Lucian racer, which is the most endangered snake in the world. I was told we have a hard stop at 12, so we can go through all of the questions. So given that the title for our panel is Scaling Conservation Through Innovative Mechanisms, Can each one of you talk briefly about both challenge and opportunity when it comes to scaling? If I can start with Diogo, is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. Scaling is a huge issue for us. We are aiming at $125 billion. And in order to do that, we must attract, until COP30, the most pledges from investor countries. And right now we are finalizing the concept note 3.0, which you will be able to access in our website, tfff.earth. We are planning to launch it in the beginning of August. And from this point forward, I can see a number of eligible countries to TFFF on the screen, and right now we are trying to engage as much as TFCs as possible to welcome the idea and to enter this initiative with us and do a roadshow to attract as much as possible the support of investor countries around the world. So to have this scale, it is quite a work, but this innovative idea is attractive to all countries because it is an investment, not a donation, it's not an ODA. It's a one-time pledge to be invested in the TFFF, and then we are planning to pay countries back within a 40-year span. We will pay back the principal as well. And this is why that F of forever is there, because with paying the countries back, we will have the 25 billion to leverage the other 100 billion within the fund. This is why it is so important for us to build up momentum until COP30, to be the platform to launch the TFFF and give it the scale it needs.
Thank you, Diogo. Maybe James?
Sure. So, the challenge as I see it for biodiversity markets, finance at the moment, is it's fragmented. There is somewhat lack of consensus on metrics, and that appears to be a barrier to scaling or deploying capital today. There is the opportunity, though, that we and many believe it will be worth more in the future than it is today, and it makes it an eminently investable asset class. So how do you connect those two? And you need innovative financial structures, and we can look to other sectors in the environmental space for clues as to how you might do that. And just one I'll leave you with a thought with for today is contracts for difference. What you can do with a contract for difference, if you have a donor pool of money, for example, the World Bank, you can say, okay, well, if we agree on a metric and you ask investors to go and deploy capital and put up, let's call it the CapEx, to invest in creating nature, positive nature outcomes, agree on the metrics as to how you calculate that, and you set effectively a floor price for whatever the metric is, so that if there is a market that is available for the investor, the program, the government, the project to sell a biodiversity credit or a carbon credit with a biodiversity overlay on it into a market, they can create value. If they're unable to, they know that floor is there. And that floor can be related to cost. It can be related to really looking into not what would produce an outsized return, but a fair return. And the interesting thing is, if you then say, okay, well, above a certain price, the value can then accrue back to the donor. What you're giving then is the donor exposure to the value of biodiversity, assuming it goes up. You're not having to put in capital up front, so the performance risk on the project lies with the investors, not the person underwriting the price. and many investors are happy to take performance risk. It's the lack of certainty over what that performance is worth that is a problem. So therein is just one interesting capital light, scalable, and with the various DFIs, World Bank, et cetera, that are out there, something that I think is eminently achievable because it's been done before. The renewable and solar wind revolution is founded upon structures like that.
No, thank you, James. It is so true that the certainty and clear message is so paramount to these models to work. Now, to you, Karen, what are your words of wisdom?
So I think I spoke a little bit about scale, but I think the word voice is what I would leave with you, both in terms of challenges, having our voices heard, in terms of what's possible in small island states, and particularly in the Caribbean region, but also the opportunity of sharing between us as small island states. A lot of the passion that I have comes from hearing other examples and being able to create and facilitate through the conservation trust funds that we work with the opportunity for the exchange of information so that all of these opportunities reach to those who need it in the countries. So from the microphones down to the ground and getting into projects that make sense. And I really think there is an opportunity for that with these kinds of exchanges.
Thank you so much, Karen. You've heard from our panelists. I think for me, a few things come through. The value of partnerships. I think we all recognize that one single institution cannot do it all, neither public or philanthropy or a private sector. So it needs all hands on deck, especially when it comes to such a global issue. And we also heard that it's not just about the biodiversity, so all of the issues are interlinked, right? The climate change, we talked about the forest fires and the issue of pollution. So the interlinkedness or interconnectedness of all of those environmental crises is glaring at us. We also talked about the local solutions, having fit-for-purpose answers and the models that deliver for addressing global issues. And importantly, that banking on biodiversity is good for business, and it is an investable class, right? So James gave us, great ideas of how that's possible. And then last but not least, that the right voices, the voices of those who are on the front lines of biodiversity laws, that's very important. So bringing those voices into this nice big air-conditioned rooms, from those villages in Amazonia, rural areas of Guatemala, etc. So I'll just leave with that. We are on time. I'm very happy to inform you, super efficient. Huge thank you to every single one of the panelists for the work you do. It's important work, it's critical work, and best of luck with your next steps. Diego, Karen, James, thank you. A round of applause.
Way for the next round of discussion, also on a very important topic, biodiversity as a driver of bioeconomic transformation. So I now invite the panelists for this discussion, as well as the moderator who will be taking us through. the erudite Dr. Rachel Biderman, Senior Vice President and Chief Field Officer for Conservation International. As the panelists are getting ready, just a quick announcement. The owner of the vehicle PAG 8901, you're asked to kindly check the parking lot. It appears that you are causing a bit of an obstruction.
Celebrating a global biodiversity alliance, joining forces with many stakeholders in the Amazon, but beyond the Amazon, actually in the world, in supporting biodiversity conservation, but also climate change mitigation and adaptation hand in hand. I have the honor to have here distinguished panelists. I'll share a little bit of their biography before I give the floor to them. We will have 2 rounds, and you can have 5 to 10 minutes in each round, I think. But if they cut us, maybe we'll have just 1 round. And basically the focus here is on bioeconomy. We heard about the global biodiversity context. We heard about finances for biodiversity. Now we are going to look into how businesses and actual entrepreneurship on the ground take place, so that we can promote both biodiversity conservation and climate change mitigation and adaptation. So we have real and concrete cases from Guyana. We will hear from Matthew about a global network that is supporting at a global level all kinds of entrepreneurship and market-driven solutions, and from Mr. Kaved Zahedi about the experience of FAO. So I just wanted to briefly give a bit of a context on the Amazon, as we are in the Amazon region and we have not much time to be able to save this enormous biome with so much rich biodiversity and cultures and traditions. So many of you may be familiar, but I'm just gonna reinforce a little bit of data, because I find important that we work on the basis of this pressing information. We know that the Amazon represents 20% of fresh water from the world. It has about 13% of the species of fauna and flora from the world. There are 47 million people that inhabit this precious biome. Amongst those people, there are 511 indigenous nations. So there are more nations in the Amazon than there are in the United Nations, speaking more than 300 languages. And this is something I like to bring to the context, because it's not about just saving the forest, it's about cultures and traditions that have been for thousands of years, that we may lose if we also lose the forest or the to climate change. So that's an enormous threat to our humanity. For us to save the Amazon forest, we need to conserve 80% of the biome. We are at 17% of destruction of this biome. We don't have much more room to work. But there's hope, and this panel is about hope, it's about solutions. And we need finance. The previous panel was talking about finance. I just wanted to highlight what Ambassador Correa do Lago brought in the first panel today. Brazil is hosting the Climate COP this year, and it's all about climate finance. I wanted to remind all of you that today, $600 million are invested per year to conserve the Amazon. That's not nearly 1/10 of what we need to conserve the Amazon. So when we talk about climate finance, we are also talking about Amazon finance. Because as Mr. Van Hildebrand, the leader of OTCA, said, if we lose the Amazon, we lose the capacity to address climate change. So I really want you to stick with those words from Mr. Martin van Hildebrand. We cannot lose the Amazon. The other big number I wanted to call your attention is that we need at least $7 billion per year to conserve the Amazon. And what has just been brought here by James from Sylvania, by Diego from the Brazilian government, and what our colleagues here will bring to you on the businesses that support the livelihoods of the Amazon is what we need to scale up to be able to get where we need to get. We already have many multilateral funds. We have the TFFF being led by Brazil and other governments. These are all solutions that are out there, and many more will come. And the other thing I wanted to stress from Mr. Martin van Hildebrand's presentation is we need to fight all the illegal economies that coexist in the Amazon. There are more than 9 different market streams, if you will, of illegalities. Today, 1/3 of the Brazilian Amazon is controlled by narco and illegal gangs. So that's a big fight. I really want to stress that. But I believe I am an optimist by nature. My organization, Conservation International, works to address solutions. We are pragmatic, we are fast movers, and I think together we can address and fight those economic illegalities. So this is what this panel is about. So first start with Raquel Thomas from Iokrama International Center. The International Center is a very important model launched by the Guyana government. It is in the 80s a pioneer in the world, looking at how protected areas could bring income, resources. So they have done all kinds of economic activities. So let's hear from Raquel, the example of the Iokrama Center. Please, Raquel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for that introduction. I'm very happy to be part of this panel. Yesterday I heard a very nice quote, which I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have the exact, from the UN resident rep, Miss Jean. And she said in Guyana, biodiversity is not just a concept, it's a way of life. And I thought that was so powerful, what she said, and sort of like sets a stage for what Iokrama means, and also all the work that Guyana has been doing for decades in terms of biodiversity conservation, involving many institutions, not just Iokrama, but government of Guyana institutions, many NGOs, environmental NGOs, and indigenous communities, and other communities as well that have been working so hard in terms of biodiversity conservation in Guyana. As we all know, or I hope we all know, I see a number of young people in this room, that Iokrama is one of 5 protected areas in Guyana. And while all the protected areas are very special, Iokrama is very, very special. Because, you know, really how it was created and the intention and the mandate. And it's a wonderful partnership between the government of Guyana and the Commonwealth, which gives it that international status compared to the other wonderful protected areas that we have in Guyana. And it's a very multifaceted institution. And I do like to quote, and I noticed my colleague Vanessa Ben, she preempted me yesterday, and she stole the quote in one of her presentations. And our first chair of our board, the late Mr. Swaminathan, as Vanda would remember, his quote was, "Conservation is only, without money, is just a conversation." And that was one of the facets on which Iwokrama was built, and really what it was meant to be. Iwokrama represents 1 million acres of forest, intact, tropical, beautiful 5-star rainforest. It's a beautiful space, and the intention was that it was to be a place to model how we can use forests without losing it. It has a road, a public road that goes through it from Georgetown, and it connects to Lethem, which connects us to the rest of South America through Brazil. And that was intentional, because the idea was as that we were to look for many ways to raise funds, to manage the area, but one of the ways was creating models of sustainable business. And that's the premise on which my presentation is here today. So one of the first things, of course, when you set up a protected area, you have to look at what you have. And the first thing is biodiversity. And Iwokrama, while we only represent 2% of the country's land mass, our wildlife, if you're talking about the biodiversity of our wildlife, we have over 50% of all the wildlife you can find in Guyana. And that makes it pretty special and spectacular. In terms of plants, well, there are about 8,000 species of plants. We have recorded about 1,200 species of plants, but there's a lot more work to do. And there's still a lot more work to be done at Iwokrama in terms of biodiversity identification and surveys and so on. But what we have done, we have leveraged that biodiversity to create businesses. One of the first things I want to discuss, of course, is our learning services. Now, training, capacity building, having students, research, all of those things. It is, while it may not be as big business as straight tourism, it is a form of tourism. And that is one of the things that Iwokrama does. And this is very important because we also have to share the mandate, and we have to share about conservation of our rainforests, as we do at Iwokrama. So learning services, having researchers come, students, and all of those other opportunities that comes with that is very important. And it's a way that you can raise funds for conservation management. The second business we have is our sustainable forestry business. So yes, we do cut some trees, but I can assure you it's very sustainable. And Guyana, I worked at Guyana Forestry Commission for 4 years as well, some years ago, and I can assure you we follow all the standards of our very good forest system management that we have at the Guyana Forestry Commission, all the other institutions that we need to abide by, including the EPA and all those other agencies that we need to work with. And we're also internationally certified by Forest Stewardship Council. So timber is the first thing you think about when you think about using the forest. So that is one of the models that we've had to create. And we're working with partners, which includes a timber partner. We also work with the indigenous communities that we have a special partnership with. The third business is tourism. Sustainable tourism. So people say ecotourism, but that is very controversial now. What is ecotourism? What is not? So sustainable tourism, and that's probably our oldest business if you want to look at it that way. We've been trying to balance, and we've been working hand in hand with the whole Rupununi circuit, working with other partners within the Rupununi, but also with indigenous communities. And as I speak about indigenous communities, and while we have our wonderful international partnership between the government of Guyana and the Commonwealth, and many other partners, you know, institutions, donor institutions, academic institutions, University of Guyana, for example, and so on. One of the very, very important collaborations that we have, and a partnership that Iwakrama would not be Iwakrama, is without the indigenous communities we work with. And we partner with 20 indigenous communities, Makushi primarily, through a body known as the North Rupununi District Development Board. And we have a special collaborative management agreement with them, which outlines the kinds of responsibilities both Iwakrama has and the communities through this body known as the NRDDB. It's really very important, and these kinds of collaborations are also very important in terms of informing policy and even new innovative mechanisms and new innovative ways in terms of managing our natural resources. One of the important things that indigenous partners bring, of course, is traditional knowledge. And while we love Western science, I'm not taking a knock at Western science, we have to manage and we have to merge Western science with traditional knowledge. It was when you merge the two and you learn from each other that you can create the best solutions for managing an area effectively. So those three businesses basically are the businesses at the moment that we are working, that are bringing in funds for Iwakrama, but businesses alone can't do it. It's multifaceted. We rely on grants. We are thankful for the government of Ghana for also supplying some funding for us. We do write grants, we write project proposals. We're looking at other innovative means in terms of sort of having persons pay for nature, kind of a kind of model. And there are many, many other opportunities. We are willing to partner with anyone. Iwakrama has partnered with hundreds of institutions and bodies over the years, and in terms of project implementation and so on. So we, including many organizations in this room, as I might say. So we are willing to partner with anyone. So basically that's Iwakrama in a nutshell, and creating that model to at least create some income to run Iwakrama. I must say that businesses alone is not enough. We have to look at other innovative ways, because we also have to monitor that 1 million acres of forest. We also have to contribute to our collaboration with the communities and other types of activities that don't bring in income, that could pay for managing that. So in a nutshell, that's what we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. It's great to hear the example of how Iwakrama manages all these different revenue streams and how you partner with so many actors to make this a success. We know Guyana is a world-renowned place for ecotourism. I think this is where we can learn a lot for the rest of the Amazon basin on how to promote sustainable tourism. Thank you for sharing. I'll now invite Matthew Swift from Concordia. Matthew, you are a business leader. You started Concordia, an initiative that is quite remarkable in connecting private sector, government, civil society with big vision and big ambitions. And I have the privilege to join you in one of our Amazon visits. The Amazon Initiative is something that you have very successfully created with the partnership of former President Duque. How have you been engaging in this space, promoting markets as a source of solutions?
Of course, thank you very, very much, and it's such an honor to be with all of you on this panel, and it's wonderful to see you again. I must say, I back everything. You're very, very special. I've been there. It's spectacular. And so I would second that. Let me just also reiterate something that I said yesterday. I love being in Guyana, and I love being back here. This is a wonderful, spectacular country, and everywhere I travel all around the world, I love telling the story of this country, because there is so much about the country that I think people around the world do not know. And when I tell them the story, people are really taken aback and intrigued and wanting to come and visit the country. So I think that's something for everyone here to really think about, is how lucky we are to be here, how fortunate for those visiting, how fortunate we are to be visitors, and for those who call this home, thank you very, very much for having all of us. And hopefully we can continue in whatever way possible to return the favor for you all hosting us, to better raise awareness on the story of this spectacular country. I want to say this. I think we are at a very important moment that I think requires a bit of reflection from every single person in this room. I think we are having a moment of reckoning when it comes to how we approach climate issues, sustainability issues, biodiversity issues, how we approach the intersection of finance and the environment. And I think it's very important that we address two key factors here. The first is, I think we have to talk more in the language of business, not in the language of doing good. Hopefully that's inherent for most good actors in the space, but business. And how governments and companies can come together to make it more appealing for businesses to care about what happens to the Amazon rainforest. Let's talk about from the public sector side. I think the public sector needs to be more pragmatic, needs to be in front of more skeptical audiences. No offense to the COPs of the world or the climate weeks of the world. I'm a convener, I get it. And there is value in having convenings with other institutions that are in the same space and focused on the same issues. That's important. But to see change, permanent change in how we approach things like protecting the Amazon rainforest, we all collectively have to be talking to those that do not understand why this is so important. And we need to talk about it in a way that comes to them and not expecting them to come to us. When President Duque first came to me and said, I want to have a summit, and I want to have a summit in the rainforest. First of all, I will admit this from the beginning. I'm not the most outdoorsy person you've ever met. I like being inside. I'd never been to the rainforest. I'd never done anything like this in my life. I thought he was frankly crazy to suggest it, but I've known him for a long time. He helped me start Concordia, and I thought, sure, why not? And I remember getting in the cab, going to the Miami airport to fly to Ecuador for our first Amazonas Summit, thinking, I have absolutely no idea what I'm about to walk into. And you know what? It was a remarkable experience. And we had business executives from companies that would never be allowed to step foot in the United Nations come with us to see the rainforest firsthand. And that was one of the many elements that made me so proud of what we did with that first Amazonas Summit and subsequently the second Amazonas Summit here in Guyana, which was we were bringing people who make significant decisions on commerce, on business, on trade, on supply chain issues, on ethical sourcing. They make enormous decisions. They'd never been to like me, they'd never been to the rainforest. They'd never seen this firsthand. And so I think we have to read this moment, and you can think about this however you'd like to think about it. You could think of this as a political moment with some of the significant political shifts we've seen globally. You can think about this as just simply a watershed moment because the need is so significant. But I think we should not look at this moment as fleeting. I think we need to look at this moment as transformational. But how do we meet this moment? We forever bring a hammer down on the echo chambers of discussions around climate issues, and in the case of this panel, discussions around the Amazon rainforest. We need to be talking in more of a business fashion. We need governments to think about the kinds of tax incentives that attract businesses to not only invest and back things, but do good in the same process. We need to, of course, have a sense of skepticism as always to any actors in this space because of the fragility of the topic we are talking about, but we've got to start appealing more to those who have never been engaged in conversations like this. And I think that is the shift. Now, I come from things from an Americentric view. I'm born and raised in the U.S. and U.S. citizen, so that's always my vantage point, and I don't want that to be read as that I think that applies everywhere else. It's not. I'm just saying that's the viewpoint that I come from. It's where I live, and I think at least in the United States there is a shift in how we talk about these issues, and there's in many ways, I think the private sector is not necessarily doing something different. They're just starting to talk about it differently. And I think we should pay close attention to that so that this movement can better reflect what this time is calling for. And with that sense of pragmatism, I think is very, very important to this issue. So I think we're at an exciting moment. Now, with all respect, I'm not sure that those types of conversations are always going to be had at the COPs and the climate weeks taking place. And as I said, I have full respect for those convenings, but I'm just saying that in order to realize the kind of change that I believe fully from what I see at Concordia as possible, it's going to require this movement to go to them and to stop expecting them to come to us. And once we change that approach and we take a more pragmatic approach, I think we're going to see some very, very positive movements and implications here. And I think, frankly, I'm very excited about the opportunity presented, and I think Guyana is the ultimate case study of this.
Thank you so much. I loved your call. I love your invitation for our community to make the effort to understand the business community and be talking to them in the way that they will understand. I think this is what this alliance here is all about, bringing those worlds together and finding common solutions. And pragmatism, I think, is one thing that unites us a lot. I'll now invite Mr. Kaved Zahedi from the FAO. FAO has been a model organization inspiring us on sustainable agriculture, sustainable businesses. So I would like to ask you, what does FAO bring to us in this space of promoting sustainable value chains, in particular the Amazon value chains, and how can we promote nature-positive economic transformation?
Thank you so much. So maybe the starting point is the topic of bioeconomy. That this is a little bit new. We've seen a sort of a rise, an increase in this conversation, not necessarily of what is under the bonnet of the bioeconomy, but putting it under the umbrella of a bioeconomy. And we've seen a big rise in that. There's a big interest. But from where we sit, and at FAO, for about 10 years, we've sort of been using that umbrella to describe quite a lot of the work and support that we provide, and I'll explain some of it. But the first point is that different countries see bioeconomy very differently, right? For some, it's entirely about biotechnology. For some, it's about bioenergy. For others, it's about non-timber forest products. For others, it's more about the socio-bioeconomy. So it's something that still is sort of finding its feet as a concept in terms of what it means. But that shouldn't put us off, because the second thing is that really at its heart, bioeconomy basically places biological resources at the core of economic systems. Some people say that it's the alternative to the fossil fuel-based economy, right? So this is an approach that is trying to bring biodiversity into the economic conversation, as you quite rightly mentioned. So why talk about it here at the meeting of the Alliance? And I think maybe there's 3 or 4 particular reasons. Number one is it's obvious. I mean, biodiversity fuels the bioeconomy, right? Without biodiversity, there is no bioeconomy, and all the issues that we've been hearing about, whether it's the ecosystem services, the genetic resources, the knowledge systems, all of this is what fuels the bioeconomy, and it's basically within the confines of biodiversity, you know, phytoremediation, it's microbiomes, it's alternative materials, etc. All of this is a bio-based economy. So this is the right place to talk about it because it joins biodiversity and the economy, and that's an important, as we just heard, that's an important linkage that we need to make. I think the second reason is that biodiversity certainly improves or increases or brings the resilience into the bioeconomy, because a healthy, diverse ecosystem, what we've been talking about, is of course a huge ally in the fight against climate change, in what is at the core of our business in terms of food security, and so much more. And in that context, when you look at the bioeconomy, it is the supplier of bio-based fertilizers, biopesticides, plastics alternatives, really a different kind of economy that actually is better suited to the future that we're heading towards. I guess the third reason is that the bioeconomy can help to unlock equity for the communities that are custodians of the biodiversity, right? We've talked about the indigenous peoples, the local communities, all of these who have been safeguarding the nature's riches. The bioeconomy can help to recognize and reward this stewardship, maybe in a way that hasn't happened before. Fair access, benefit sharing, protection of that traditional knowledge that was the subject of an earlier conversation. We've seen bits and pieces before through the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Nagoya Protocol, access and benefit sharing, all of this. But this is really making it large scale as an economy-wide approach. And maybe finally, the bioeconomy can help us do more with less. You know, my Director General keeps saying that we have to feed people. It's an increasing global population. We have to feed them. But how can you produce more with less, right? And in a way, the bioeconomy also helps us. It begins to valorize some of the waste streams, things that are just discarded right now, as value-added products. And that brings income, again, to communities. Now, you can turn waste biomass from banana production into materials. This is one of our projects in Pakistan, into textile fiber, or bioconverting waste from urban centers into fertilizer using the black soldier fly larvae. I mean, these are just examples of how there's all this huge amount of waste, including from agriculture, that can be repurposed to become an income stream. And that's a part of what the bioeconomy does. And what we've seen is that many countries are waking up to the opportunity of a bioeconomy. Around the world, around 23 countries and sub-national sort of level provinces now have bioeconomy strategies that are looking exactly as to how they can tap into these income opportunities of a bio-based economy. And yes, while a lot of it varies in terms of what they are trying to do, as I mentioned, it means different things to different countries. Many of them have all of these elements of better use of biological materials, of genetic resources, of waste streams that have literally gone to waste. And actually almost half of them, interestingly, highlight that the knowledge and benefits arising from biodiversity management are not yet being and should be more equitably shared. So that knowledge piece of the bioeconomy is actually present, which is a great, it was a surprise certainly to me. So that's really the sort of the opportunity that's opening up under the umbrella of the bioeconomy. Now, on the downside is that we're not seeing enough conversation on the bioeconomy, for example, at the national level in these kinds of places where we're focusing on biodiversity. So if you look at, for example, countries' biodiversity plans, the famous NBSAPs, right, the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, of all of the world's NBSAPs, only 8 of them mention the bioeconomy. So that connection between biodiversity and the economy is not as strong as it could be within the biodiversity planning of countries. And that's one place I think we can help. And maybe this is the kind of push that an alliance can give to bring that consciousness and that understanding right now as those new biodiversity plans are being put together for the Convention on Biological Diversity. And the opening we have is that the global biodiversity framework of the convention has now gone beyond conservation, and it's very much also about the sustainable use of biodiversity. It's exactly your project writ large, and that gives us the opening, I think, of bringing the bioeconomy much closer to the biodiversity conversation, the biodiversity planning, and the biodiversity investments that will come after that. In that regard, let me just say that we have been asked by our countries that are members of FAO, they've recognized this and they said, we need to understand more, we need to replicate these examples that are mushrooming all over the world, and we need to understand it in a way that we can begin to bring some metrics into the conversation, that, you know, it's not a sort of a everybody all for their own. We need a partnership that can help us share examples, and to some degree this is inspired by the fact that this conversation has reached the highest levels, right? You saw that at the G20 under Brazil's chairmanship, bioeconomy was one of the issues. They came up with high-level principles of what is a bioeconomy, what can it and should it be doing. South Africa, in their presidency, are continuing that. So we've been asked to put together a multi-stakeholder partnership that brings private sector, the custodians, the countries together to understand, replicate, and begin to drive investment towards a bioeconomy. And let me finish by saying, as we do that, it is really important, exactly as the Alliance has been talked about, to have the metrics in place. We might not want to define the bioeconomy, countries might want to see it slightly differently, but we have to be able to define sustainability of a bioeconomy. It is not everything and anything, right? And we have to put the parameters around exactly what that means. And we have come up with quite tight metrics of what is a bioeconomy, how do you measure a bioeconomy across all of these sectors, including, of course, and importantly, the forest-based bioeconomy that's going to be so vital for the Amazon and the Amazon's future, or the future of the people that depend on the Amazon forest. So that, for us, is some of the work that we have been undertaking in the bioeconomy as FAO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zahedi. You gave us a very broad understanding of the possibilities of bioeconomy in the world. It means different things for different stakeholders. And now we're going to hear from a very specific and interesting case from Guyana. I invite Melanie McTurk to talk about the experience of the Karanambo Lodge and how you have translated all these concepts of economy to a very concrete business. The Karanambo Lodge is in the Rupununi region. For those of you who haven't been, I highly recommend. It's jaw-dropping. It's one of the most pristine ecosystems in the world. And what lessons from your model can inspire other businesses that are working in the forest and for the conservation of biodiversity and inclusion of local communities?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. Well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit, for those who may not know Karanambo. The Karanambo story is an old one. You know, we've been there for nearly 100 years. And the Karanambo story starts in much the way as many other people around this room, their family story starts, in that we were part of the world that we were born in. And so in the early days of Karanambo, it was a cattle ranch. We were collecting balata from the trees. We were slaughtering arapaima. We were hunting for our food. And we were taken from the land because we assumed that it would always be there. But like everyone else, we started to realize, and this is the genius of Deanne McTurk, in that she was the first person who recognized that there was an impact to what we were doing. That as leaders in the Rupununi, because of the unique position in the Rupununi of Karanambo, many communities were coming to Karanambo, many homes, their livelihood was dependent on Karanambo. And so the practices and the techniques that we perfected were being taught and all across the region. And it was Deanne McTurk who recognized that there was an impact to what was being done. And more importantly, that we needed to change how we were interacting with nature if we expected to be able to live in this space in the future. And Dee did two things that I think at the time were very revolutionary. She recognized, one, that we had to take decisive action for protection. And two, she recognized that people had to be at the forefront, at the core of that action, that we could not make an impact if we weren't thinking about the people themselves. Because the reality is, and this is where I come to the lessons learned, people are not the problem. If you think of people as the problem, they will become the problem, right? The reality is people are not inherently evil. People are hardwired to care for their families, to care for their children, to look after the people around them, their communities. And in a context where there are no other opportunities, they rely on the land. If we can give people an option, a new opportunity, something that allows them to live with dignity, to care for their families and care for the land, then the majority of people will embrace that option. Because especially in the Rupununi, there is no separating people from the land. It is the life's blood. And so Karanambo started doing otter rescues and ecotourism. And very much the ecotourism came as a, what shall I say, sort of an add-on, because people were always coming to Karanambo from the very beginning because of the amazing biodiversity. I mean, we are at the very heart of the Rupununi wetlands. And can I say, not to compete with Raquel, but Karanambo is probably the most amazing place on earth. But that is because we are the linchpin in the Rupununi, which is absolutely the most amazing place on earth and the most biologically rich. And again, Iwakram is there on the little bit outside, but we are a very generous community, so we always let them feel that they're part of the family. But coming to ecotourism was a natural thing in the sense that we'd always had visitors. We were renowned for our hospitality, but also it was getting to be a little hard to entertain all these people for free. So Auntie Dee started to say, well, left a little something now. But then, and this is where the magic happens, then she realized, you know, we could use this as a tool to generate funds to help support the work that we were doing with otters, because as we started to get more and more baby otters coming in, we needed money to keep them, to look after them. It don't happen for free. There are some women out there who are all willing to give their extra breast, right? And we could also use this as a tool for generating jobs. And again, this idea that we needed to create opportunities for people that gave them dignity. And there are two things about ecotourism I want to really stress. And I agree with Raquel, the term becomes a little difficult. So I'm going to be saying sustainable nature-based tourism a lot. And that is when you start to talk about things like conservation, when you start to talk about things like protection of spaces, it becomes very intangible to people on the ground. It's this wishy-washy idea that's up in the clouds. Sustainable nature-based tourism gives us an opportunity to give a tangible value to the biodiversity we already have and to the work that's being done by conservationists. So it helps to connect the people who are living in landscapes that we are trying to preserve and protect with the work of protection and conservation. Biodiversity, ecotourism or nature-based tourism also connects those people like yourself who may not have ever come to this part of the world again before in a very tactile way with why we are fighting this fight. And there's nothing that connects that is better at that. So there is an immense value to nature-based, sustainable nature-based tourism from that perspective. But again, I genuinely believe that we also have to look at this from a business perspective. And that is where I find it very interesting. If you look at the Rupununi, over 60% of the people in the Rupununi work in the tourism sector at some point during the year. If you look at the GDP, the tourism sector is the next highest contributor after oil and gas and timber and mining, which means of the non-extractive industries, tourism is the highest contributor to GDP. So what else? I don't want to go further on there, but what else have we learned in our time with doing nature-based, sustainable nature-based tourism? Well, the other thing we learned is Carinambo's, in the grand scheme of things, really small. And we don't have a lot of resources. But we got lots of friends. And this is where, understanding the power of collaboration, of getting together and finding the people who believe what you believe is so important. And that's why this conference, this summit is really important. Because as we know, biodiversity, animals, plants, they don't know barriers. We genuinely need contiguous networks of protection. And we realized that the best way for us to protect Carinambo was to get together with our friends and our communities and all those people around us and protect the wider Rupununi. And so that's what we have been doing for the last 10 years. And again, there have been some lessons. And one of the important lessons that I feel we have learned and we've been able to demonstrate in the Rupununi as a collective community of tourism practitioners and conservationists is that who owns the narrative is incredibly important. It is important to how we see ourselves as the practitioners of whether we are in tourism or conservation. It is important to how people see us. And it is important to how powerful we are in terms of being able to make change. Now, Rupununi, am I running out of time? Sorry. Okay. And then, so I'll make my final thing. And this is this. Not only is there power in collaboration, because we've had instruments like Visit Rupununi emerge from this, but also that sustainable nature-based tourism practitioners are a powerful ally in the goal of promoting the importance awareness and understanding of biodiversity, protection, conservation, and preservation. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Melanie. What a powerful message, and also about human nature and the will to make a business thrive on human values and conservation altogether. I've been learning a lot from all of you. We still have a very short round so that you can add something. But before I pass you the floor, the opportunity, I just wanted to illustrate with one example, one anecdote I've been involved with. In the past 2 years, there's a group of about 30 organizations from the whole Amazon basin, from the 9 countries, that have put together a network called the Pan-Amazonian Bioeconomy Network. We started that in June in 2023. We understood that bioeconomy not only was a big word, but a big opportunity. We understood that there are many colors to bioeconomy, as you very clearly put, Mr. Zahedi, but we chose one aspect of bioeconomy to work together. We understood that from the 47 million people who inhabit the Amazon, 2 million of which are indigenous peoples, there's a big need for sustainable economic solutions for their livelihoods. These are the custodians of the forest, of the different ecosystems in the Amazon, and they live under the poverty line. So unless we find a real solution that brings income to these different communities and people, we will not save the Amazon, we will not achieve the 1.5. So at the very heart of it, if you think about it, the custodians of the Amazon, 2 million of which are indigenous peoples, are in hunger. So how can we possibly think about saving the Amazon in such a situation? So we got together as a community from multilateral development banks, the World Bank, the IDB. We have NGOs like ours, the Conservation International. We have investors, impact investors, big banks, entrepreneurs, ecotourism leaders, and we invite all of you to join us, by the way. This whole idea was, let's work together and to do the leapfrogging we need to do in the Amazon, to be able to get where we need to get. And imagine, and together we are imagining this big solution. So I invite you to learn a bit more about the Bioeconomy Network, the Pan-Amazonian Bioeconomy Network. We just had our meeting in Leticia last week, and we learned from one another about finance, about markets, about sustainable solutions, and we want to work as a collective to be able to deliver. So after sharing this story, I want to go back to Raquel, to Matthew, to Kaveh, and Melanie, and give you the opportunity to share with us, positive stories. Where can we get? I heard a little bit of very healthy competition between the different lodges and ecotourism business. I find that very healthy. What other stories can you share with us of success that we can bring to this community here, but also beyond to the whole Amazon and other different ecosystems as market solution or business solutions for conservation? Please, Raquel.
I just want to add that Melanie can get away from Iwokramish, so she did work with us for a little bit as well. We've touched many lives in Guyana. In terms of success stories, I do want to touch on a tourism stories. A tourism story that I think that I'm happy to say that Iwokrama was part of is also seeing some of the most, what I think, creative and indigenous tourism enterprises in Guyana, the ones that started in the Rupununi, and also working along with organizations like Iwokram and so on. I want to make note of tourism enterprises such as Sarama Eco Lodge, Riwa Eco Lodge, the Yupakari story, which is the Cayman House. Those three, I really think they're really true examples of how community tourism can be managed. And I want to say, while we have been involved, and of course, you have other agencies and so involved in them as well, I always like to say they're home-owned and homegrown. It's from the people, with the people, and I really am proud of being affiliated as an organization to some of these tourism enterprises, and encourage. I know there are a lot more tourism stories developing around the country with the assistance of the Guyana Tourism Authority and other agencies, and offering other stories as well. But I think those three stories are certainly foundational in terms of, for communities who really want to do business, to link with those particular communities and hear their stories and see how they manage the businesses and how benefits are shared at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Mr. Zahedi, please, any final thoughts?
Thank you. So, I mean, I guess I'd go back to the big opportunity that this presents, and it's an opportunity not just to raise some funds to protect, but it's an opportunity to sustainably use this amazing resource of biodiversity for the communities themselves. You asked for examples. I mean, there's many. I remember sitting in the meeting of the G20 last year, and Brazil said, "Oh, it's over 40% of our economy or GDP depends on the bioeconomy." And then Germany came and said something similar. And so it's maybe we haven't just looked at it in the way that we need to understand, but we've heard it here as well. We sort of take for granted the bio-based solutions and economy that is available to us. It might be just of creating the supply chains and the markets for acai out of the Amazon, right? So that those communities have additional income that they can then use for their livelihood. So I think this is a big opportunity of a bio-based economy that goes beyond raising a little bit of money that can help us protect pieces of that biodiversity. And the examples are many, but what we haven't seen is the exchange of those. And we see in many parts of the world, I mean, imagine here, in this part of the world, in Guyana, in the Caribbean, better use of banana waste. I mean, this is a big banana producing region, right? And better using that waste for fiber, right? For material. We've done fashion shows in Milan with basically demonstrating the beauty of these fibers that are based out of nature. So I think the opportunities are there, and I would think big about it, and I would ask Matthew to organize a big summit on the Bioeconomy Summit. I'd like to see a next Concordia Bioeconomy Summit, because whether it's the US or Guyana or Brazil or all over the world, countries are experimenting with this and have opened up real income streams for real local populations through the bioeconomy, and we need to scale that up, and we need to demonstrate that it's investable and it brings a return. And I think that's what we hope to see, and I think we will see over the next 3, 4, 5 years for the bioeconomy.
Thank you. It's very encouraging to hear you both, how these worlds are coming together, and how biodiversity is at the core of everything. And when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations put together in such a collaborative way with all walks of organizations from all walks of life, I think bioeconomy is where it all comes together. We will sort out the climate, the biodiversity, desertification, the security challenges by promoting an economy that is bio-based. And this is what human beings are, right? We are dependent on nature and bio-based creatures. Moving forward here, Melanie, would you like to bring your final remarks?
I think, again, we're in this wonderful moment in time, and I think it's very much all about choices. And the core for businesses especially is this idea of responsible choices. And one of the things that I think is important in this moment, because of where we are, both in terms of understanding of biodiversity loss, as well as the amazing technology and thought processes that are going on in the world right now. I think we're at a unique moment where not only are we able to embrace those things that we love by saying, look, let us be led by our hearts and do the right thing, but that we now have the tools in terms of technology, as well as a growing sense of responsibility among our corporate sectors that allow us to galvanize that all into making better choices for the future of our world at large, to enable, to ensure that not only are we putting the policies in place to enable that average people out there make the right choices, but also that we put the funding that's necessary to make that a reality, because it's, again, it's not enough to passionately care about something. You have to have the money in your pockets, the cheese to rub together to go out and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Matthew, I cannot help but ask you, for me, Concordia is such a beautiful name, with the heart. I don't know if that is how it translates, or with passion. What was in your mind when you created this vision for humanity, when you put together this amazing initiative called Concordia? And your final words as well, please.
Thank you very, very much. And I'll share a little bit of a secret story with everybody on how the name Concordia came about. I like to think, well, if you look at its Latin origins, it talks about harmony and understanding, and isn't that perfect if you're creating an organization that's entire design is around bringing people together? But frankly, we thought of the name after a few bottles of wine at a dinner and thought it sounded great. Then we learned what the origins of the word were. So I wish I had a better, more thoughtful answer as to how we came up with the name. But no, it is a great name. I'm very proud of it. Concordia was the convergence of the, frankly, passions that my co-founder, Nick Logothetis, and I had and continued to have while we were both students. And for all the younger people in this room, if you take anything away from any of my interventions on this panel, I will say, first off, I don't come from any kind of background that would, frankly, attribute to what I do today with Concordia. I grew up in a small southern town in the United States. My parents didn't work in politics, did not work in foreign affairs, they didn't work in media. But when I went to school and met Nick, my co-founder, developed these passions for world affairs, geopolitics, news, what was happening in the world. And then we also had a bit of that overabundance of confidence as young people to go to other convenings and say, we could do this better. And you have to have a little bit of that if you're going to be an entrepreneur. You gotta have the belief that you can do it better than everyone else. Little did we know how hard it would end up being to develop over the last 15 years, but we're very proud of it. Concordia, and I want to talk a little bit about, just briefly as we wrap things up, I want to again go back to what I think I see in this moment. And I could be wrong. I might be getting this wrong, but I don't think I am, because this is a moment that's not going to come around again for a long time. So the question is, how do we meet that moment? And for instance, when I look at the evolution of our summits, we used to talk a great deal about philanthropy. We still talk about philanthropy, but at a fraction of how much we talk about market-driven solutions to issues. Because philanthropy is a wonderful, should always, in my view, be looked at as a wonderful short-term solution. There's an amazing gentleman on our board who ran USAID, and he presented this great 3-part series at Concordia. I might be butchering this, but I think it was called Journey to Self-Reliance. And the entire theme of it was this idea that aid is something that you should work your way out of. and that we lost sight of that, which is one of the reasons why I think we're having the sort of moment we might be having in the United States and in other countries in terms of this reckoning of, has what we've been applying to these issues and subjects really worked or not? And you brought up the Sustainable Development Goals. I agree, fantastic framework and done in a very collaborative way. At this point, based on the Secretary General's last report, we'll be lucky to meet 30% of those goals by the time we get to 2030. So what's the solution? What's the answer? I think it's making the tent bigger, not smaller. I think it's making things very focused on those long-term solutions, that pragmatism, and yes, to some extent, thinking about the language of business and profit when factoring in what are the solutions that we're bringing to the table, because these issues affect everyone globally. President Duque, I love when he talks about the Amazon rainforest and describes it as the lungs of the world, and Guyana has one of the most remarkable parts of that. The key now is we need to go out there and make sure everyone else knows that and understands that. And so thank you for hosting this panel, and thank you to President Ali for putting together this alliance, because I agree. I think this alliance is a type of framework that embodies what I am talking about when it comes to how to seize this moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. I also want to thank President Ali and especially the organizers of the event. I cannot forget a dear colleague of mine, Priya Rampersad, who's doing this behind the scenes, sitting somewhere over there. If not for Priya, I think most of us wouldn't be here. I think this message coming from Guyana to the rest of the world is a very powerful one. I'm very honored to be here in Guyana, learning so much from all of you. Thanks for being here, and let's work together. We will get this right. Thank you.
Let me extend heartfelt thanks to our panelists and our moderator who took us through a very enlightening discussion. And I'm sure that we can all walk away, and particularly as we are now upon the lunch hour, we are reminded of the importance of having all hands on deck. This is truly an important conversation, and it requires all of us to be present in this moment to understand its power, to understand its significance, and to be true ambassadors of the message that protecting biodiversity is no longer an option. It is a must. So once again, I want to thank the presenters and the moderator for so eloquently delivering this important message for us. At this time, I want to invite you all to the break for lunch, which is going to be a hard stop at 2. And I want to invite you back to the room and to urge you to please be prompt. We have 3 more panel discussions before the close. They're very important topics that are ahead of us. And I ask of you to work with us on maintaining this time. So without further ado, please enjoy lunch, and I'll see you back in the dome.